Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes from Otis McNutt, who says, you mentioned that you waited a few years before going to college, and I have a question. How old is too old to go to college? I graduated high school in 2003 and was all set to go to college until I was sidelined by medical issues. Thankfully, I am now healthy enough to plan ahead long term, and I am seriously considering college. My question is this. As a 32-year-old man, am I too old for college? I don't want to be the weird old guy surrounded by teenagers and 20-somethings. Well, I don't think there's any such thing as too old for college. I think if you're 32 and you're thinking of going back to college, starting college for the first time, I think that's a great thing. I don't think you should let your age stop you from doing it. I was 25 when I went back to college, and I started like year one, you know what I mean? Like I didn't have credits built up from back in the day that I could sort of, start in the middle. I started, as a freshman in college at age 25. And there were times when I felt a little out of place. There were times when, especially in the first year or two, when you're going through those, 100 level classes, when the other students mostly are like 18-year-olds, that you feel a little out of place. There were several classes where I was clearly the oldest person there. But you get used to that. And there are a surprising number of non-traditional students. In several of my classes, I was not the oldest person there. There were classes I took where there were actually quite a few non-traditional students. Now, when I started back, I was at a community college, and there were more non-traditional students there. But even when I transferred to a four-year university, there were still, older adult students for many of my classes. So I wouldn't let that stop you at all. You certainly are not the only person contemplating, going to college at an older age than is typically thought to be that of a college student. I think you should go for it. I don't think you should let your age stop you at all. If it's something you really want and it's important to you, you should go. Androgynous buttocks. Hey Steve, thank you for responding to my previous question. I have a new one for you. Do you agree with Barbara Eichenreich's assessment that the Western culture's obsession with positive thinking is a bad thing? She argues that it has created a taboo around being sad or angry even in situations where these emotions are warranted. This pressure to always smile puts an extra burden and in some cases the blame onto the victim. In short, do you think that smile and everything will be fine is bullshit? Yeah, when you put it that way, it's bullshit. I generally have a positive outlook on life. I generally think positively, just naturally. But I think the problem is when you're in a situation where you don't want to think positive, or maybe you're in a situation where it's not really warranted to think positive. If you're in a situation where something sad has happened, where you're grieving, or something unexpected, some unexpected tragedy has happened, forcing yourself to think positive and sort of short-circuiting the grieving process or the process of feeling sad and kind of working through your emotions, I think that can do way more harm than good. It's one thing to be encouraging, it's one thing to be positive and to try and look on the bright side and to be optimistic. I mean, I think those are really, really powerful things for motivation and for just giving you a nice, positive, happy outlook on life. But if you force it, and if you are talking about the sort of thing where, like you say, just smile, just put on a smile, and everything will be okay, that can be destructive. That can be very warping. And as you say, that can put a lot of pressure on people, because if you're surrounded by people who are always forcing themselves to be happy, and then you're in a situation where you're not happy, where you're really sad, or maybe you're depressed, you're suffering from depression, and you don't feel like you can be happy. Maybe you feel like there's something wrong with you. Maybe you feel like it's your fault for not being happy. Everybody else is happy. Why aren't I happy? And that can be a real problem. You can feel like you're in like a Twilight Zone episode where you're the only person who's sad and everybody else is happy, and everybody else is going, why are you so sad? Why aren't you happy? That can be a real problem. So yeah, in that sense, I completely agree with her. I think that positive thinking and optimism are very powerful things and can be great tools for motivation and encouragement, but they shouldn't be just forced onto every person in every situation. That doesn't help anybody. GL, Neil deGrasse Tyson, has stated that if we double NASA's budget from 0.5% to 1% of government spending, we can transform the country from a sullen, dispirited nation weary of economic struggle to one where it has reclaimed its 20th century birthright to dream of tomorrow. Do you agree and think we should be funneling more tax dollars into NASA? If so, how do we motivate the people and the government to make the change? Oh, I completely agree. I absolutely agree 100%. In fact, I'll take 1%. Don't get me wrong. If I read in the newspaper tomorrow that Congress had voted to double NASA's budget, I would be doing a happy dance. I think that would be amazing, amazing news. But I would rather have like 5%, to be honest. I don't think you can spend enough money on NASA, especially when you look at how much we spend on military spending. It can be a great source of national pride. Think back to, I can't think back to it because I wasn't born yet, but think back to the 1960s when the space program was front and center in American life. And yes, a lot of that, most of that, at least the political motivation for that was because of the Cold War. We had to beat the Russians, and Kennedy had said we're going to land on the moon before the end of the 60s, and then he was assassinated. So there was a lot of political and social, cultural motivation to realize that goal. It wasn't all just about the purity of scientific pursuit. There was a lot of politics and there was a lot of romance about it as well. The idealization of the astronaut as a great American hero. But I think that was the net result of that was incredibly positive. It gave us something to be proud of and something to look forward to and something to invest in as Americans that didn't have anything to do with killing people or going into other people's countries and fucking up their shit. It's really sad that we've invested so much of our national pride. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be proud of our military, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be proud of the men and women who serve in the military and execute those duties with courage and with honor. But it would be nice to have something that we could invest our national pride in that didn't unavoidably involve killing people and going into other countries and fucking their shit up. It would be nice if we could have something that was a little more pure than that. And I think the space program would be one of those things. So you cannot throw enough money at NASA to suit me. Grey Ghost Volume 1. What is your opinion on Muslims that hold liberal and pluralist views on Islam, like drinking for instance, yet still label more extremist and violent groups like ISIL, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab as not true Muslims? Just as I am against people who try to use the extremists to paint all of Islam with the same brush, saying something like, well, the extremists are the ones that are following the Quran the closest, or they're the purest Muslims, or they're the best Muslims in some sense. They're the most authentic Muslims. I am also opposed to, however well-intentioned they are, the more moderate groups saying that the extremists are not Muslims. I think we have to accept the fact that they are. I completely get where they're coming from. If I were a moderate Muslim, I would not want to associate myself with, ISIL. I would not want to associate myself with violent jihadists. So I can understand the impulse of wanting to say, oh, we're not with them. They're not true Muslims. Just as I imagine most Christians would love to be able to say of the Westboro Baptists, oh, they're not real Christians. But the thing is, I think they are. Looking at it objectively, I think that they are. Now, I don't think that they should be taken as the representatives of the entire faith, just as I don't think that the jihadists should be taken as the representatives of all of Islam. I would much rather have the character of Islam be defined by the moderates. But at the same time, it's only fair to point out that the extremists are still Muslims. There are many different kinds of Muslims. And it's not fair to say, well, we moderates are the only true Muslims, and the extremists and the terrorists and the jihadists, they're not really Muslims. They're just different kinds of Muslims. So no, I completely am on board with that. I don't think it's fair for moderates, not just of Islam, but of Christianity or any religion, to sort of allow themselves the luxury of just defining those problematic groups as not being a part of their faith. I think part of addressing the problem and part of solving the problem is acknowledging that they are a part of your faith. Sarah Santos, Steve, if you could become president, what problem would you try to solve first? Also, would you choose Stuffy as your VP? Shive Stuffy 2016. I think if I'm on the ticket at all, I should be the VP and Stuffy should be the president. And I don't know if I even belong on the ticket if Stuffy's going to be the president. I would probably just drag him down. But if I were campaigning for president, I would be campaigning relentlessly against poverty. I think addressing poverty in a really serious, effective way is one of the best, most important, and potentially transformative things we could do in the United States today. Poverty itself is not necessarily the cause of other kinds of underprivilege, but it is an exacerbator of all other kinds of underprivilege. If you can help people out of poverty, if you can lift up economically disadvantaged people, you can help people who suffer from a whole spectrum of different kinds of disadvantage. Because whether you are disadvantaged because of your race, or because of your education level, or because of your gender, or your gender identity, or your sexual orientation, or your lack of proficiency with speaking English, or your disability, or whatever, if you suffer from a disadvantage, if you find yourself in a disadvantaged category, and you are also poor, it amplifies all of your problems. And if we can alleviate that problem, we could help so many people and lift up so many people. So I would be campaigning tirelessly for raising the minimum wage, for a universal basic income. I would want to strengthen unions to keep wages up. I would want to make post-high school education, not just universities, but also trade schools and technical colleges, as affordable and as available to as many people as I possibly could. I would want to continue to push for more and more widespread radical healthcare reform to ease the burden of health expenses, of medical expenses on people. I would do everything I could think of to do to push for measures that would alleviate poverty, increase funding for unemployment, increase funding for food stamps and housing assistance and all kinds of public assistance for the poor. I would do anything I possibly could that I think would alleviate and seriously help the problem of poverty. Because I think if you can help that, if you can address that problem in a real meaningful, effective way, you can create such incredible positive change across a really broad spectrum of Americans. So that would definitely be number one on my list. Chris Abbey, I have a personal but ultimately philosophical question for you. The daughter who my then girlfriend and I gave up for adoption 31 years ago has recently contacted me. She is a warm, wonderful, funny person who is very happy in her life. I put all that to the family she grew up in, and I don't think I have any right to be proud of who she's become, yet I am. Where do I stand on this Gordian Knot? I feel I may be arrogant here. Oh, I don't think it's arrogance. You can be proud of something without having to take credit for it. Biologically, at least, she's your daughter. I mean, I think you're very thoughtful and very correct to say that, her and any part of her that is good, that is due to her upbringing. Of course, the credit goes to the parents that raised her, not to you. But she's still, she's your daughter, and she contacted you, and she's an adult now, and it turns out she grew up into a really great person. There's nothing wrong with being proud of that. It doesn't mean that you're taking credit for it. It just means you're happy to see it. We're proud of lots of stuff that we don't have anything to do with. My wife is a brilliant writer. I have nothing to do with that, but I'm proud as hell of her. I'm not saying I take credit for it. It has nothing to do with me, but I'm incredibly proud of her. So no, I don't think you have to. I don't think it makes you arrogant at all. I think it just makes you human. Something that you love, that you care about, that you have an investment in, has turned out to be something great, and you're proud of it. Nothing wrong with that. William Wright, what advice would you give for aspiring writers? I enjoy writing. I've completed a few NaNoWriMos, and I'm interested in pursuing it further. I always find that I have great ideas and concepts, but dreadful prose. I have trouble with character and world building, sticking to projects, and a great deal of other aspects. Could you recommend any YouTubers or videos to watch or texts to read? Any feedback would be appreciated. I can't really recommend any books or any YouTubers to you because I haven't really read or watched anything like that. I don't really have anything to draw from to recommend to you. But my advice to you as a writer is very simple. Write as much as you can and read as much as you can, and get other people to read what you're writing. Show your work to other people. If that means, finding someplace online, maybe starting a blog where you can put up sort of test pieces just to get people to read them, to see if it's any good. If you're not yet at the stage where you would feel comfortable submitting work to be published professionally, get people to read your stuff. Join a writer's group. If there's a writer's group in your town where you live, or if there's an online writers group that you can find, there are a bunch of them that you feel comfortable in. You feel like your writing would be understood there and would be appreciated, and people would be able to give you helpful comments. Write as much as you possibly can and get people to read it and to give you serious constructive feedback on your writing. Read as much as you possibly can. If there's a particular genre that you're interested in writing, that you feel drawn to, read books from that genre, from many different writers, from many different viewpoints, from many different backgrounds. Notice what these writers do. Notice how they do what they do. Deconstruct it, analyze it for mechanics, for style, for all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it's a lot of work. If you want to get better at it, and you want to get to the point where you don't feel as insecure about your prose or your characters or what have you, the only way to get past that, the only way to get good at it is to do it. Just keep doing it and keep looking at other people who do it and try to absorb as much of how they do it and incorporate that into how you do it. That's really the only thing you can do to become better at writing, is to just write, and read and get people to read your writing. Harry Ray, where's the line between being racist, sexist, whatever, and simply playing the odds in a racist, sexist, whatever society? For example, here in Australia, Aboriginal people commit a disproportionate amount of crime, not because they are innately more criminal, but because of the extremely disadvantaged position they have in society, a position they've been forced into by racist policies over centuries. So if I'm approached by a group of young Aboriginal men, I tend to be more wary than if I'm approached by an otherwise identical group of young white men. When is that just a reflection of the reality of crime rates between groups, and when is it racist? Or is it both? I think it's okay to recognize trends, especially if you then go beyond recognizing the trend and you seek out the explanation for the trend. So if you notice, let's say, that Aboriginal people commit crimes at a higher rate than non-Aboriginal people, you see that, you notice that that's a trend, it's statistical, it's probably objective, undeniable, but you don't just stop there and say, oh, Aborigines commit all those crimes, what is wrong with those people? You go deeper than that and you say, oh, well, of course they commit more crimes. Look at the situation they've been forced into by their horrible treatment at the hands of white people. They've been pushed into a different, they're more impoverished, they're more disadvantaged. No wonder that they tend to commit more crimes than other people. So I don't think that's racist. I think that's just recognizing a trend and looking for the explanation for it. But if you then take that overall trend and you apply it automatically to individual members of that group, knowing nothing else about them, then it becomes a stereotype, and then it becomes something that could be called racist. If you see an Aboriginal person just standing on a street corner and you know nothing else about them other than the fact that they appear to be an Aboriginal person, and you say, oh, that one's probably a criminal, those people are criminals, that's racist. But for you and for that situation, it's hard to tell. It's probably a little of both. In a sense, you're right. You are you can't help really but play the odds. You can't help but think, it's just a fact. Aboriginal people commit more crimes than other people. It's nothing against them as people. They're not innately criminal, but they're just, you're sort of going over this in your mind as you're in that situation. You can't, in a sense, you can't really help that. But I think it's good that you're aware of it. I think the most important thing is that you're aware of what is happening. You're aware that you're uncomfortable with what you're feeling. And I think that means that you're not racist. Or at least that you don't mean to be racist, that you don't want to be racist, that if you could, you would purge yourself of these feelings. But it's not as simple as that. I wish it was. I wish it was a matter of just, I see what I'm doing. I'm going to stop doing that. But it's not that simple. It's a struggle. It's a struggle every day. And it's sometimes hard not to come to conclusions about individuals based on something you might know about the group as a whole. It's difficult. It's a struggle. I'm sorry I can't do more to alleviate the struggle for you. But that sound means I'm about to come one step closer to alleviating my struggle to complete this video. Because it is now time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Germ-free cat. If you could learn a new skill, what would it be? In my case, it would be learning to play a musical instrument well. Is there any skill you lack that many people have, but you don't particularly care that you lack? In my case, that would be dancing. Can't do it, and I couldn't care less. I'm going to agree with you on both counts here. I am not that great of a dancer, but it doesn't really bother me. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. And if I could learn a skill that I don't have, it would be to play a musical instrument. Either the piano or the guitar, because those seem to be the two big ones. Ezra Henderson. Hey Steve, I think Halle Berry was a really good Catwoman and was a victim, if you will, of a bad script. What is your opinion on that, and who is your favorite Catwoman? I don't think that Catwoman movie being awful was Halle Berry's fault. I think it was not just the script, it was also the director, the producers. The whole project was just misbegotten from the start. I don't think it's Halle Berry's fault that her Catwoman movie was terrible. I think it was just a really stupid idea for a movie that just was never able to transcend the horribleness of its concept. And my favorite Catwoman is Julie Newmar from the 1966 Batman Adam West series. Dangerously Talented. How come on my question and answer series, Tell It to Someone, the questions the same people ask are far less intelligent than in your question and answer series? Well, Dangerously Talented, I think it's obvious that they are intimidated by you. And so because they're intimidated by you, they ask sort of dumb questions on purpose to sort of slide in underneath. They're afraid if they really put their full thought and effort into asking what they think of as a really good, thoughtful question, that it will still, be beneath you, and then you will ridicule them. I think that's clearly what's going on. They're just afraid of you. They respect you too much. Fred's Fresh Beats. How many MRAs, anti-feminists, do you know personally, i.e. not just through the internet? 0. I know 0 people who are MRAs or anti-feminists in real life. In fact, most people I know either would call themselves feminists or have no opinion on the subject whatsoever and don't give it any thought in their everyday life. I have never met a single person in real life who I would call a genuine MRA or anti-feminist. It is a largely internet phenomenon. I suspect either because their numbers are just that tiny and insignificant, or, and this is equally likely, they just don't have any fucking balls. They're just cowards and they can only spew their hatred online where they're safe. Brandon Davis. Steve, baseball question. With the recent serious injury of a fan being struck by a broken bat during the Oakland Red Sox game, do you think it's time for the MLB to reconsider its traditional stance on wooden bats? I know this isn't the only situation, but for me it just seems like the consequence of using wooden bats outweighs the benefits. Now, people have been... occasionally there will be a story of a broken bat flying into the stands and hitting someone and they get hurt, but it's happened so many times over the years, and yet it is also relatively infrequent. I mean, when you think about how many hundreds of Major League Baseball games are played every year, and those sorts of incidents are still relatively rare, I don't think that's a reason to ban wooden bats. And just for the sheer romance of the game, I would be very, very reluctant to get rid of wooden bats. Clarence Crawford. Steve, I used to consider myself an MRA, but I now consider myself an egalitarian. I can't bring myself to become a feminist because of their opinion on pornography. I feel as though feminists should support it. What are your thoughts? Well, there are feminists who do support it. Actually, there are lots of feminists who have no problem with porn at all. And there are many feminists who have no problem with porn in principle, but have a great problem with the way porn exists practically. They feel that women are exploited by porn as it exists now because it's a very male-dominated, male-controlled field. But in principle, they have no objection to it at all. And then there are feminists who do have a big problem with it. There's a diversity of opinion. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, feminists don't like porn, but they should. It's kind of pointless to tell feminists what they should like because there's a diversity of opinion among feminists. And you can't say that feminists don't like porn because some of them really don't like it. Some of them are fine with it. So if that's your reason for not being a feminist, I don't think that's a very good reason. Pragmatic cynicism. Steve, are you as sick of the self-discovery in recent sci-fi, young adult literature, cinematic adaptations as I am? Do you long to see a character that knows themselves and or their capabilities thoroughly from the onset of their associated story? Yes. I don't think it bothers me as much as it seems to bother you, but yeah, that sort of coming of age story arc, the sort of settling in, the accepting responsibilities or accepting your role or whatever, that's a very common story. And maybe it's too common. Maybe we should find other stories. There is a great deal of pleasure to be had in watching a story where the protagonist is a confident, assured person who is really good at his or her job. Becca Hawkins, hey Steve, what was your favorite childhood moment? And why? Your channel is great, Becca. Well, thank you so much, Becca. Probably the first day I got my dog. Think skeptically. Why do you hate me? P.S. Peanut butter or Nutella? Well, of course I don't hate you. In terms of just sheer flavor, probably Nutella. It's yummier. But in terms of utility, I would say peanut butter. Because I think it's kind of gross to think of like a Nutella sandwich. Matt Greer, since becoming an atheist, is there still a certain book in the Bible that you enjoy? Yeah, actually, there are books in the Bible, there are many books in the Bible that I enjoy for the beauty of their writing. The language of the King James Version is exquisite. I really like the book of Genesis. I really like the creation story. If I'm looking at it just as literature, just as poetry, I think it's really wonderfully written in the King James Version. I love the book of Genesis. The book of Ecclesiastes, that's another one. A lot of the most famous quotes from the Bible come from the book of Ecclesiastes. The phrase or the verse that Pete Seeger wrote the song about, to everything there is a season, a time to plant and a time to reap, a time to be born and a time to die. That's from the book of Ecclesiastes. So yeah, that is another one that's just beautiful. It's a really wonderfully written book. So I choose that one, or Genesis. That's it. That's it for the questions. Before I get out of here, I'm going to give somebody a shout out, and the shout out this week goes to a so deserving YouTuber. You have no idea. The shout out this week goes to CubeTheNoob. Cubey. My old buddy Cubey. I was on Cubey's podcast last week, Cubic Dimensions. You can go to Cubey's YouTube channel and find Cubic Dimensions episode 2. That's the episode that I'm on. We had a great conversation for about 2 hours about all kinds of stuff, about politics, about society, about Seinfeld, about all kinds of stuff. It was a great talk. Not just me. There were other people on there too that were all great. But QB is one of those young YouTubers who I have confidence and faith in that is really going to clean this shithole up and really make this a nice, respectable place, at least for a few years until he discovers that there's way more important shit than making YouTube videos and he just goes away, which will be good for him and bad for us. But anyway, CubeTheNoob, check him out. Awesome channel. I said on his podcast, and I will say it again to you, if I had become a father at age 19, I would hope that my son had turned out just like him. He's not my son, by the way. I mean, maybe there's some resemblance, but it's completely coincidental. Anyway, CubeTheNoob. Check out his YouTube channel. It's awesome. And tell him I sent you, or don't. I don't really care. Anyway, that's it for this week, everybody. Please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. Ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can next time. So until then, take care, everybody.